You know when you don't work out for a few months and then you finally go on that run or you get back to the gym, that first time back, it's rough. You feel out of shape. It's kind of painful. You have a hard time catching your breath. Your heart rate's kind of jacked. And then you wake up the next morning and it's even worse. Like your back is sore, your knees, your feet. And I'm just now starting to get to the age where I'm starting to feel a little bit of that. And for the rest of the week, I mean, you're miserable. You're sore. You're in pain. It's not fun. Well, I have not preached to a live audience in 4 months. It has been nothing but speaking to a camera week after week after week. But unlike working out, I am hoping that today is not painful for all of us. That we're not waking up tomorrow morning thinking, wow, that was rough. I'm hoping I can shake the rust off pretty quickly today. So back on March 11th, and this is a date that I'm always gonna remember, March 11th, I was sitting at Chick-fil-A on Bloomingdale with a group of our college leaders. We had just finished our Wednesday night student service. We're all hanging out talking, and obviously at that point, we had no idea that would be the last time we would be meeting with our students for quite a while. We had just found out that our mission trip for spring break to Honduras had been canceled. We were supposed to leave that Saturday. We got the news that Wednesday night. And of course, we were bummed. We were disappointed. And we were kind of talking about, what are we going to do during spring break instead? But even when we were having that discussion, most of us assumed, this is going to be a 1 to 2 week thing. Spring break might be kind of messed up. Spring break might be ruined, but we're going to get back to normal pretty quickly. But while we're sitting there having that conversation, I get on my phone and I go on to Twitter. And Twitter is kind of my source for news. And I see 2 stories on Twitter that completely changed my perspective. The first one was this, is that Tom Hanks and his wife had tested positive for coronavirus. And everyone loves Tom Hanks. He was kind of like the first famous celebrity who tested positive for the virus. So I see that story. And then just a couple minutes later, I see that the NBA season had been suspended indefinitely. That one of their players tested positive, and they were canceling the season. They were postponing it indefinitely. And immediately, in that moment, I knew this isn't going to be a 1 to 2 week thing. This is going to be something we're probably going to be dealing with for a while. And over the next couple of days, pretty much all of our lives were just turned upside down. Plans changed, things were canceled, life just began to look very different. But even while all of that was going on, things were changing, things were being canceled, I assumed, and I think most of us did, that by now we would be back to normal. I don't think I'm alone in thinking that by mid-July, when we're just a few weeks away from the school year, we're going to be back to normal. We're going to be past this, but here we are. And the word that I think kind of describes this season that we find ourselves in is uncertainty. Uncertainty. For many of you, there is uncertainty about your job situation, about work. You're not sure, when am I going back to the office? You're not sure, is my position still going to be around in a few months? For most of us, there's uncertainty about the school year. Like, is the school year actually going to start on time? If you have kids, you're trying to figure out, do we send them to school? Do we homeschool? Do we do e-learning? There's so many unknowns about the school year. There's uncertainty about events and travel plans. I mean, how do you make plans for October and November when this thing is changing constantly? There's uncertainty about the college football season. And I know, SEC fans, you're going to be really, really upset if there's no college football. But there's uncertainty about these things that we used to take for granted. And here's what I know. Uncertainty is difficult. When you're in a season of uncertainty, there's so many unknowns, so many what ifs. We're filled with anxiousness and stress and worry. And we start to wonder, what's going to happen? What should I do? How do I move forward when there are just so many unknowns? So this morning, what I want us to do is I want us to look at a group of people who found themselves in a season of uncertainty. In the book of Exodus, we read about how God delivered his people, the Israelites, out of Egypt. They had been enslaved in captivity for over 400 years. And God raised up this very unlikely leader, a guy named Moses. And most of you know the story. God sends Moses to Egypt. He goes to Pharaoh. He's speaking on God's behalf. He says, let my people go. And of course, Pharaoh says no. So God sends a plague. And then Moses goes back and says, Pharaoh, God says, let his people go. And Pharaoh once again says no, and there's another plague. And this happens 10 times. And eventually, after the entire nation is devastated, and after Pharaoh loses his firstborn son, he finally agrees, okay, you can leave. And God begins to lead the Israelites out of Egypt, out of this captivity. He parts the Red Sea. He leads them through there. And of course, the Israelites are ecstatic. I mean, they're finally free from this oppression. They're celebrating, they're partying. God has performed this miracle. But then God begins to lead the Israelites, begins to lead his people into the wilderness, into this season of uncertainty. And that's where our story picks up today in Exodus chapter 16. In Exodus chapter 16, starting in verse 1, we read this. The whole Israelite community, they set out from Elim and they came to the desert of Sin. Now, we just need to stop there. Don't ever plan a family vacation to a place called the desert of Sin. I mean, they should have just known this is not going to end well. We're going to a place called the desert of Sin. I mean, it sounds like Vegas's cousin over in the Middle East, which is between Elim and Sinai. And on the 15th day of the second month after they had come out of Egypt, in the desert, the whole community, they grumbled against Moses and Aaron. The Israelites said to them, if only we had died by the Lord's hand in Egypt. At least there we sat around pots of meat and ate all the food that we wanted, but you have brought us out into this desert to starve this entire assembly to death. So the Israelites, they've been out of Egypt for about a month and a half now. And it has not gone how they expected it to go. Their party, their celebration, it ended pretty quickly. And now they found themselves in the middle of the desert. They don't know what to do. They're hungry. They don't know where they're going to get food. There's so many unknowns, so many what ifs. And what they start to do is they start to complain to Moses. They start to turn on this leader who had led them out of Egypt. They start complaining to him. In fact, they are so frustrated with their situation that they start to say that they wish they were back in Egypt. That they wish they were back in Egypt. Because even though it was an awful situation, at least it was familiar. In Egypt, they knew what to expect. In Egypt, they knew where their next meal was going to come from. There was more certainty in Egypt than there was in the wilderness. So God, he hears their complaints, he hears their concerns, and jump down to verse 11, look at how he responds. Verse 11, the Lord said to Moses, I've heard the grumbling of the Israelites. I've heard their complaints. Tell them, at twilight you will eat meat, and in the morning you will be filled with bread. Then you will know that I am the Lord your God. So God, he hears their concerns. He hears their complaints. And he tells them, look, Israelites, my people, I'm going to provide for you. I'm going to provide meat in the evening, and I'm going to provide bread for you in the morning. But what we're going to see in the next few verses is that God chooses to provide in a very unique way for his people during this very difficult season of life. And what I want us to do is I want us to look at two aspects of God's provision for the Israelites. Because I think the way that God provides here for the Israelites is very relevant to how God may be providing in our lives during the season of uncertainty. So the first aspect that we're going to see is that during this season of uncertainty, God provided in a new way. God provided in a new way. Verse 13, it says this, that evening quail came and it covered the camp. And in the morning, there was a layer of dew around the camp. When the dew was gone, the flakes like frost on the ground appeared on the desert floor. When the Israelites saw it, they said to each other, well, what is it? What is this? For they did not know what it was. Moses said to them, it is the bread that the Lord has given you to eat. Now, I find this part of the story very interesting. God, he decided, he chose to provide for the Israelites in a way that was very familiar. And the evenings he provided quail. That was the meat that they were going to eat. And quail is something that they had back in Egypt. It was something that they were familiar with. But God also chose to provide in a new way with bread that was called manna. And this is something they had never seen before. They looked at it and they said, what is this? We've never seen anything like this. God provided in a brand new way. And here's why I think this is significant for our lives today. During seasons of uncertainty, when our lives are changing, when things are changing drastically and quickly, when things are being turned upside down, when we're in a season of uncertainty, just like the Israelites, I believe that God often uses those times to provide in a brand new way in our lives, to do something in our lives that we have never seen before. Oftentimes, God uses these seasons of uncertainty to do something new in our families, to do something new in our marriage. Now, I'm not saying to go get a new marriage. I'm saying God often does something new in our marriage. He does something new in our relationship with our kids, something fresh, something that we haven't seen before. God often uses seasons of uncertainty to do something new in our faith, where he teaches us something new, where he challenges us, where he stretches us, where he causes us to grow. Sometimes God uses seasons of uncertainty to do something new in our career. For many of you, I know your career is kind of up in the air right now. You're really not sure what's going to happen, and sometimes God will use these seasons to direct you to a new assignment. Sometimes God uses seasons of uncertainty to do something new when it comes to our priorities, where he begins to adjust our calendars a bit, where he begins to change the way that we spend our time. God does something new in these seasons of uncertainty. But sometimes I think we miss the new thing that God is doing because we're busy looking for the familiar thing. We miss that new thing that God is trying to do in our lives because we're busy looking for the familiar thing. You see, the Israelites, they were busy looking back to Egypt. They said, I just wish we could have died there. Well, I wish we could be back in Egypt. And why did they want to be back there? Not because it was good, not because they were happy, but because it was familiar. It was comfortable. It was known. They were missing this new thing because they were looking for the familiar thing. During times of uncertainty like we find ourselves in today, I think we can make the mistake of looking for the familiar thing, of chasing after that. I don't know about you, but a phrase that I've used often over the past few weeks is, I just wish things would get back to how they were before. I just want things to go back to normal. And certainly, there are things that I want to have go back to normal. I don't want to deal with one-way aisles at the grocery store for the rest of my life. Like, I'm about over that. I don't want to have to do 2 seats between non-family members. I think most of us are over that. We want that to go back to the way it was before. But do you really want everything to go back to normal? I mean, do you want everything in your life to go back to how it was before? I mean, do you really want to go back to the pace of life that just had you constantly stressed, constantly on edge, always feeling like you're about to burn out? Do you really want to go back to not spending quality time with your family? Look, I know some of you parents, you're just like, hey, send these kids back to school. It's been a long summer. I'm getting tired of this. But think back to before this, when all of you are just moving in different directions constantly and you never had time to spend together as a family real quality time where you sat down and just talked and were together. Do you really want to go back to the busyness where you had no time in your schedule for the things that really matter most? Do you really want to go back to the spiritual apathy where you just coasted through life, not really thinking you ever needed God because things were easy, things were comfortable, things were safe? Do you really want everything to go back to the way it was before? Listen, God is doing something new in our lives during this season. I love what Isaiah chapter 43 says. Isaiah, he's recording what God says here, and they're reflecting back on the Israelites. And in chapter 43, it says this is what the Lord says. He who made a way through the sea, talking about the Red Sea, a path through the mighty waters, who drew out the chariots and horses, the army and reinforcements together. And they lay there, never to rise again, extinguished, snuffed out like a wick. And then he says this, forget the former things. Don't dwell on the past. See, I am doing a new thing. Now it springs up. Do you not perceive it? Do you not understand it? I am making a way in the wilderness and streams in the wasteland. Listen, during this season of uncertainty, God may just be doing something new in your life. And he doesn't want you to be in a hurry to get back to what is familiar, to get back to what is normal. He wants to do something that's new, something that may even be better in your marriage, in your relationship with your kids, and in your career, in your faith. Don't miss the new thing that God is doing because you're busy looking for the familiar thing. God, he provided in a new way. But the second aspect of God's provision that we're going to see is that he provided on a daily basis. He provided on a daily basis. In verse 16, it says this is what the Lord has commanded. Everyone is to gather as much as they need. Take an omer for each person you have in your tent. The Israelites did as they were told. Some gathered much, some little. And when they measured it by the omer, the one who gathered much, they did not have too much. And the one who gathered little did not have too little. Everyone gathered just as much as they needed. So God, he gives these very clear instructions to the Israelites. In the morning, when you see the manna, you and your family are to go out and gather what you need. Just what you need for your family. And the people who gathered a lot, they didn't have too much. And the people who gathered too little, they had enough for their family as well. They had exactly what they needed. But then Moses adds this in verse 19. It's very interesting. Moses says this, no one is to keep any of it until morning. None of you are to keep any of the extra manna until morning. You're supposed to throw out any extra that you have. Now you read this and you think, well, why? Like, why would you throw out the extra? If food is so scarce right now, if this is something that they are needing to survive, wouldn't it seem unwise to just throw away the extra? Like, why not on Monday morning, you and your family go out and gather as much as you can to bring it back to your tent. Get a week's worth of food all at once, hold on to it. I mean, this food is scarce right now. Why would God tell them to get rid of any extra? It's simple. Because God wanted to know, do you trust me? Do you trust me? Do you trust me to provide for you and your family during this season of uncertainty? Listen, when we face times of uncertainty, it's very easy for us to begin to lose trust in God. We start to doubt. We start to ask questions like, God, where are you right now? God, what are you doing? God, don't you know the needs that we have in our lives? We start to doubt God's provision. And I think if we were honest, most of us would deep down say, you know what? I don't want God's provision on a daily basis. I want all of God's provision all at once right now. I want to know what the next week is going to look like, the next month, the next year. I want all of that provision right up front, right now. I don't want to be in this uncertainty. I don't want to have to trust. I want all of that provision right now. But sometimes God will withhold what we want so that we will trust him with what we need. God will withhold those things that we want. We say, God, will you give me all the answers? Will you give me all the provision? Right now, I need it right now. And God will say, no. I'm going to hold that back so that you will trust me day by day by day with your needs. In the Gospel of Matthew, one day the disciples, they went to Jesus and they said, Jesus, we can tell you're pretty good at this prayer thing. And we were wondering, can you teach us how to pray? How should we pray? And Jesus begins to walk them through this prayer that we know as the Lord's Prayer. And in the prayer, Jesus encourages them to pray for their daily bread. Give us today our daily bread. Not our monthly bread, not our yearly bread, not our weekly bread. Give us today our daily bread. We are to look to God, to pray to God, to trust God with our needs day by day by day. And I just wonder, what area in your life right now do you need to trust God to provide? What is that area that God is inviting you and encouraging you to trust him with? For the Israelites, it was their literal daily bread. That was the greatest need they had in their life. But for you, your daily bread is that area of greatest need in your life. For some of you right now, it's finances. You're facing unemployment right now, or you've gotten a pay cut at work, and you are worried about your finances. You're not sure how your family's going to get through the week or get through the month, and God is inviting you to trust him with your daily bread. For some of you right now, it's your family. It's the health of someone in your family. It's your kids. It's your aging parents that you're worried about. You're stressed. You're anxious about these things, and God is inviting you to trust him. For some of you, it's your future. You've got some big decisions coming up that you have to make, and it's just hard to make any decision right now with the way things are changing, and God is saying, will you just trust me day by day by day? Here's what I know from experience and also from God's word, is that God promises, he guarantees to provide for our needs. Maybe not all at once, maybe not all right now, but day by day by day, God provides exactly what we need. And this isn't prosperity gospel that God will give us everything that we ever want. This is a promise from God that he is faithful to meet our greatest needs. I love how this story ends in verse 32. Moses said this is what the Lord has commanded. Take an omer of manna and keep it for the generations to come, so they can see the bread I gave you to eat in the wilderness when I brought you out of Egypt. God wanted them to preserve a piece of manna. And it wasn't so that they could eat it later. God wanted them to preserve this piece of manna so that the future generations had something tangible they could look at and be reminded. To be reminded about how God provided in a new way during the season of uncertainty. To be reminded about how God met their needs day by day by day when they didn't know where their next meal was going to come from. At the beginning of this year, I got my wife and I these 5-year journals. I don't know if you've ever seen these before, but you have like 7 or 8 lines for every day, January 1st, January 2nd. And each year you go through, it's 5 years, and you can kind of see everything that's happened in the years before on the same day. And as we were starting a new decade, the 20s, we were a few weeks away from our first baby being born. I was like, this is going to be a big year. This is going to be a big 5 years coming up. And I've never been one to journal and to write stuff down, but I said, you know what? I think this would be a good time to start keeping track of just things that are happening in life. And I started the journal in January and was talking a lot about how, the baby's going to be here soon. And then in February, I'm writing about how our baby was born and she's healthy and she's beautiful. And then all of a sudden I get to March, and what I'm writing quickly changes. I'm talking about, the restaurants are closing down, and NBA's canceled, and all of this stuff going on. And obviously, when I got this 5-year journal and wanted to start recording what was going on, I had no idea what 2020 would have in store. Some days I write just a little bit. Some days I'll write a lot. But I'm excited for a year from now, or 2 years from now, or 5 years from now, to have this tangible thing that I can look back on and see how God was doing something new in my life. To see how God was faithful to meet my needs and my family's needs day by day by day. Listen, God is doing something in your life right now. You may not see it, you may not feel it, but God is working in a new way. And God is faithful to provide for your greatest needs day by day. You know, eventually we're going to be on the other side of this. Things are going to go back to normal. And there's going to be a temptation for us to forget what God did, to forget how God provided. Don't forget what God did during this season. Don't forget how God provided. God is moving and God is working, even during this season of uncertainty.